Cool. Thank you, Marek. And let's see if this works. So, I'm Tim Bray. I want to talk about a bit of a middle gap. So this is kind of probably above the kind of company who just uses their ISP-provided router, and probably be below the level of company that has a dedicated IT team, expensive routers, lease lines, that kind of area. So IPv6, it's kind of easy to set up on hosted services. You just test it, you add some Quad A records, you add it to your monitoring services. ISPs can do it, home connections can do it, thanks BT and Sky. It's been around for a while. But my theory is that middle-of-the-ground companies will struggle to deploy IPv6 in a way that works for them. This is just my evidence of that I've been doing this for too long, and that since 2005 we've had IPv6 in our office. To be clear, I'm definitely pro IPv6. It's definitely the way forwards. You shouldn't take anything that I say as being negative about IPv6. It's a good thing. So imagine in the olden days, you go and order your ADSL, you plug your router in, it works, you've all got always on internet, Facebook and Google just work, and your background technology is just PPP, IPv4, DHCP, and NAT, because almost every ADSL internet connection for a small business in the UK is IPv4 NATed, and probably wired and later Wi-Fi. Roll on a couple of years, and they're still in an office. You've maybe got 10 people now. You might have started to rely on the internet for everything. You use Google Docs, you use Slack, you use VoIP. You have no internet, you're out of business. And so one day you have a problem, something's broken. You summon your IT company and you say Facebook went down. And they say mumbo jumbo jumbo, outage, BT's fault, OpenReach's fault, loss of sync, faulty phone line, something broke. We'll say some internet failover. And the guy goes, how much? And he goes, oh, £1,000 plus a second internet connection. And the boss goes, cool. And it works. And next time there's a line fault, the talk line still works. You could do fiber to the cab or ADSL backup. And these kind of things are common. A lot of people have these boxes. The story works just the same for security. Someone reads in the news, so-and-so got hacked. Oh, well, if you buy a £3,500 WatchGuard firewall, job's done. And people just put this stuff in. And you get Noddy failover. I'm talking Sonic Wall, Draytech. You all know the kind of boxes I mean. They're usually very Noddy. They just use ping to detect an outage. You can connect to ISPs, and people use these. An IPv6 failover is easy because you have NAT, you have two routes on a box, you have a bit of policy route. And fundamentally, when you change ISP, it doesn't affect anything on your internal network. You just delete the route and the traffic goes the other way. I'll just kind of cover myself there. So you just NAT to different source addresses. And my view is that these guys and the people who install them don't want IPv6. They don't think about IPv6. It's just something they turn off on the box when they install the machine. It's something their customers aren't asking them for. And they don't know how it works because it's got funny long numbers, not 192.168.1 dot something. So with IPv6, if you change ISP, if you have IPv6 on the network, you change all your internal addresses. So we swapped ISP at work, and all our printers stopped working because my junior IT bod had thought it'd be really clever to set the printers up with IPv6. And because when he did the printout on the page, it had an IPv6 address there, and he popped it in the print server software, and it worked. So he was like, cool. But when we swapped ISPs, it stopped. And that would be something that my boss would go, mumble, mumble, the printer's broke, oh, IPv6, well, why did you turn it on? So you might think that you could just fail over and turn off the IPv6. So you have an outage, so you go, right, well, we'll turn off IPv6. Well, that's how Facebook works, isn't it? And you might find that you need IPv6. So I had two ADSLs into the same router. One ISP messed up with IPv6. The IPv6 failed over. I wasn't there that day, and someone said, I'll just turn the router announcements off for IPv6 and we'll all be good. Unfortunately, we were using IPv6 for our NFS desktops and everything stopped working. It was a bit of a cock-up, but it's just something that gets in the way. We probably shouldn't have been doing it that way, but it just was. So you have this idea in IPv6 that you have a router, and the router sends route announcements. Is everybody happy with this idea? And the client keeps a lifetime. The client keeps an idea about how long an address is preferred for, and an idea about how long an address is still valid for. So in theory, this means you can just connect two routers. You have one switch and two routers from two ISPs, and if the PPP connection goes down, then the router stops routing announcing, and you can't reduce for IPv4 because you have two DHCP servers, so it's like a reason for v6. It's no good for any kind of server. It doesn't work if you've got an iPhone. And in theory, you can set the preference on the router for which addresses are preferred. So you end up with a picture that looks like this. You'll find, though, that I don't know how to make it point. The clients end up with two IP addresses there, so they've got to work out which one to use for their connection, presuming there's no multipath TCP or any newfangled kind of things. And if your router disappears, then in theory the address will time out and it will use the other one. But it's not actually that great because the client will only really have one default route, so traffic that's going to ISP2 could end up in the router for I've drawn the diagram the wrong way around, but it will end up in the wrong router, and the default route on that router will be out of the wrong door. My practicalities with this kind of stuff suggest that most so Linux PCs, most phones, certainly iPhones, the moment they get a route announcement or see two route announcements on the network, they just stop and you end up with no IPv6 connectivity or IPv6 addresses with no default routes, which means you've got something broken. It's just a config example for RADVD, the route announcement about how you have two prefixes on the same network, with the idea being that one's got a long lifetime and the other's got no preferred lifetime. So you could do this with two connections from the same ISP. So AA ISP do this well. You just take two connections, two routers, same address space on both connections. This gets around kind of overnight maintenance in the exchanges, or if you've got a duff line. But it still gives you a single point of failure if your ISP has a big problem. There's some enhancements to this idea which are kind of new. One is called SADA, which gives you a different routing table for each source IP address. It's quite a new idea, and it saves using policy routes. You can have a different routing table. When this gets around, if you imagine the diagram of you with the two routers, it gets around the idea that you can have effectively a different routing table for different address space. There was an interesting talk at the IPv6 Council that suggested that if you use SADA and then OSPF between all of your routers, then it would be okay because the packets would go to the right one, and if your edge routers are adjacent, then traffic that ends up on the wrong router can go to the other router. But I think that when you go to the kind of people who install small networks, OSPF is just one level too complicated, and the client machines still have to choose which source address to use for their traffic. If a connection's gone down and the address is still valid, then they're just going to send packets that aren't going to go anywhere. Or you could NAT IPv6. So you could actually just recreate your IPv4 land by NATing IPv6, and that would solve the problem. But to me, that gets around any advantage of IPv6. To me, the main advantage of IPv6 is that you have less state in your firewall or your router. You can open a lot of connections in even quite a small number of PCs. And if you remove the state from the firewall, or from the router, just keep saying firewall. If you move the state from the firewall, then you have a simpler setup, and it also makes it easier to have two routers. And also the talk from Exa earlier, that was effectively a port address contention issue. If there was no NAT and you were IPv6, then you wouldn't have that kind of problem because you wouldn't reuse the port so quickly. And you kind of think about it, that actually you can get to the stage where IPv6 with PI space is easily doable. You get an AS number, you buy 2 routers, you talk to 2 ISPs, and it's fairly easy to do. But I don't think this is sustainable for every business in the UK to set this up, and it's also a complicated setup for the kind of people who understand 192.168 addresses. But it does give you a really good setup. This is a good way of having really reliable internet across 2 providers. And I've done this. And really, if you're a little bit bigger, by the time you've thought about doing PI space and BGP and 2 connections for your V6 traffic, then you might as well just join RIPE and do it for your V4 traffic as well, because the costs aren't that far if you really rely on your internet. Again, not sustainable for everybody in the UK or for every small business in the UK. This is the link to the talk from the guy, the IPv6 Council. And that's it. That was a lot faster than I thought it was going to be. But I expect some people have some difficult questions. And I think some people recently involved with the ITEF might have some suggestions about what they think might change.
I'm certainly hoping there are some questions from the floor. There's one over there at the back. Again, if you could state name and affiliation so that people on the webcast know who's asking, that would be brilliant. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm Tom from Cloudflare, I presented earlier. Where does Slack come into this? And would you start using Slack with smaller subnets than /64? Because that's now a possibility on BSD.
Would you use smaller subnets than /64? I don't think so, because it's just easy if you use /64 subnets and then you get auto configuration. And actually, even consumer connections in the UK have /56s, so you've got quite a few /64s to go at. And the people I'm thinking of probably only even have 1 subnet, so there's no reason to use a smaller one.
All right. Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, that definitely helps. Yeah.
When you start doing anything with V6, you realise that you just don't worry about addresses. You just apply some /64 to a VM host because you just have loads of them. You don't, and even if you're on the Sky connection, you get /56, which is, I can't do the sums in my head, but a few, enough for you to have a few different subnets of /64s.
It's an interesting point, though, Slack and DHCP-v6 and support in operating systems. I mean, notably Android is...
So Android requires DHCP-v6 to get the resolvers. So you have to basically run. So when you do have a routing announcement, you can specify what your recursive resolvers are. That's pretty much the only config you can send. You timeouts for your addresses, what the subnet is, and resolvers. Android doesn't accept anything in resolvers, so you have to have a stateless DHCP-6 server at the same time to get the addresses. And I found bugs in the iPhone client as well when you, in fact, in all operating system clients, you provide more than 1 address or anything that's not very standard, you find that things don't work or IP addresses stop working faster than you expect.
Thanks. I think, yeah, there's another... Is that Neil? Is that Neil? Go on.
Neil can ask a question. Go on, Neil.
Yeah, just your slide about 4G as a backup. You do know that 4G runs on the same networks that broadband runs on. I don't know, I mean, it's a small detail, but I just thought I'd point it out.
Where was that one? Yeah,
next slide.
But the point is that it's not a real problem, because you could actually get leased lines, although not all leased line providers are amazing.
I think they're very great value for money, actually.
Yeah, but
everyone's agreeing by the sound of the support for my point.
If anybody in this room has had an ADSL line that's on its way out because of a bit of water in the junction box or something like that, that goes a bit intermittent, it drops from time to time, and it doesn't get to the point where it's bad enough to where you can adequately fault it, the voice quality is not bad enough, that's a real business problem, and the step between a £60 a month quality business ADSL to a £400 or £500 a month lease line is a big step, especially when you see adverts from somebody going, you could buy £30 a month second line and you're away. Yeah,
that was my point. My point was you just...
The 4G uses the same backhaul.
You just have to be careful about what your shared risk environment is. Because, we've seen it... you have a power cut, we lose the exchange, we lose the cell towers. And typically power cuts are regional. And in a world where we're being asked to and you know, it's probably less of an issue for this specific talk that you've got, but just a general one. And while we're being asked to put more redundancy and resilience in it, it's not just, oh, well, you know, we're a bit naive. Well, we'll buy it from Fred and we'll buy it from Jeff, and that means because it's not 2 Freds or 2 Jeffs, everything's great. And I just don't think we should be encouraging that behaviour.
No, you're absolutely right. If the single point of failure is the BT exchange, and the BT exchange gets wiped out, then you're fine. And if you were somebody with 1,000 employees, you'd get redundant circuits.
Or the Vodafone exchange.
Or the Vodafone exchange.
Or the top, skip, I don't know.
or the BT green box that gets run over. And actually, if you, you know, but you can buy circuits that have talk backhaul compared to BT backhaul, and it just gives you a little bit of something. It's not perfect, but it gives you a bit of something different.
Yeah, well, I mean, then you have to look at we're a talk. They're in our exchanges, and you know, just again, you know, if you're selling backup, sell backup. Don't sell some half-assed kind of billing thing. Sell backup. That's all I'm saying. Sorry.
We'll move on to some questions from the front. I think. Tim had his hand up. Tim Chown.
Hi. Yeah. So I think with Android you don't have DHCP v6 stateful or stateless. You have to use RDNSS support in the router advertisement, don't you? Or?
You've made me doubt myself now, but one's one way and one's the other.
So I think Android, if you speak to their people, they believe that RAs are the way to go because you then have that dynamism in configuration of things, and DHCP v6 is. So because the servers aren't necessarily in sync with the state of the network, they prefer not to use that.
So I think route announcement is the way to go. It is very useful because if you have 2 routers and 2 router announcers, and providing those route announcements are giving out the same subnets, so providing you have 2 route announcements giving out the same subnet, you're all happy and effectively you get a router failover. If a router dies, the traffic will, after you configure the timeout, 30 seconds might be a good one, then the data will go to the other. And you don't need to have any VRRP or anything like that. You just have 2 routers, 2 route announcements, and it works. If you have 2 routers giving out different information from the router announcements, that's when clients just mess up. Clients just don't cope with that. So this slide, 2 routers giving out router announcements, and they're giving out the same data, same subnets, works great. If they're giving out different subnets, that's where you've got a problem in practical installations.
Okay, well, tests I've run show something different. So I think the thing to look at here, there's a draft in the ITEF by Jen Likova about using conditional RAs to provide multi-homing, which has just gone through v6 ops, and it's just in the IESG queue now. And what that does for a single router, it's using policy-based routing out. Okay, a home £30 router probably doesn't have that, and it's using deprecation of the router advertisements if a link fails inwards. But for 2 routers, then yes, it is more challenging. You either have to use VRRP or have some way of detecting a failure on one router or the other. But it's a really nice draft, and I think it covers off some of the things that you've been talking about.
I know. I think the draft is cool. I've not actually read it, but I get the idea of where you're going. The practical things are that I've certainly seen on Linux clients that if you send the root deprecation, then it kills the other root as well. So it actually deletes the root from, there's bugs in the implementation that you're sorting out there.
Okay.
I
shall go back and do more tests. I've not seen that.
There's a lot of things where you kind of go, yeah, that should just work, and then when you have a go, it just breaks. And it's a wider thing with v6 that there's a lot of things that are okay in theory but don't work in practice.
I think Neil just made a case for greater diversity of suppliers in the infrastructure and backhaul business, which seems like an excellent suggestion.
Noted.
Who do you work for, Neil?
Sorry, I welcome anyone investing in network. Bring it on, right? I genuinely would love more people to build network. We don't have enough people building network. We have a regulator that doesn't encourage building of networks, so fantastic. I absolutely support it. In fact, for the last 20 years, I've built four national networks here in the UK and 3 European ones. I would love more people to build networks. And by the way, one thing just to note, Lots of our business customers have static addresses, a significant number of static IPs.
On V4 or V6? Both. But you're probably unusual is that you're big enough to be able to give people multi-pop access and stuff like that. For the people bigger than I'm thinking, you could do them 2 connections to 2 pops. And that's probably bigger than the size of where I'm thinking.
At the back.
It's not so much a question as a point. It's just that I'm actually in exactly the situation you talk about. I'm a operations manager for a small company. We've got about 100 staff. We've got 2 internet connections, one with M24/7 with microwave backhaul, one fiber through exponentially into my office. We've got IPv4. We've got 2 firewalls with VRRP for failover. We use NAT on that, and that's all fine. I would like to, bring our office into the 20th century by deploying IPv6. And yeah, it's a lot. It seems unnecessarily hard, and there's a few things from your talk which I'm going to take away and read a bit more on. I just kind of wanted to say that this is a real concern for SMEs of the kind that I work for.
So I would go and get some PI space for you if you. It's not difficult to do. You just have to ask either of those 2 ISPs, and I'm sure they'll do the paperwork for you, and they'll charge you 50 quid a year. And there's a bit of router config to do, and you just require someone to do that. And it's not difficult, but it's not understood. It's not something that you can go to a bog standard IT support guy and say, I want some IPv6 setting up for an office environment so that it works nicely across all your devices. The skills aren't out there in the market. But if you need some help, come and ask me, and I'll certainly send you some pointers. And ask your suppliers whether they'd be happy to advertise some PI space for you. You get a /48, so you'll get 65,000 lots of /64s, and it costs 50 quid a year to get the addresses. It's just doing the routing, and you need BGP routers.
And finding the right person at the providers who will
And
do
the
the
right
sales and understands your request.
And having asked that question, one provider did it in like 15 seconds for me. They just said, ask an IRC, and my peering sessions were up in seconds, faster than I could even configure my own routers. And other people, it went above a support team's desk to ask for IPv6 that's been rectified. So it just depends what you're asking for. But most ISPs have a peering department, and it's the same thing. And I think you also find yourself connecting closer to their core network, and that gives you better resilience in bumpy times. When things are going a bit wrong and a transit provider has a problem or something like that, you'll find that you have things working when other people don't.
I think we've got time for two more questions. Was there one somewhere over there? One over there, okay.
Hi, I'm Aled Morris from White Fibre, and we are putting in our own network in the ground. So, yeah, thanks. Yours, so this is not about the IPv6 actually, but yours is the second presentation today that I noticed referring to joining RIPE, which could have been interpreted as being, this is how you get some IPv4 address space, because RIPE's policy says members can have a /22 of the address space they currently hold.
Yes.
And I think you should just be clear that that's not necessarily the main reason you should be joining RIPE. It's not the wrong reason for joining RIPE, but RIPE is a lot more than just how you get a /22 of IPv4 space. And you don't need to join RIPE if all you need is some address space. You can buy it on the open market. You can register it for the same £50 a year fee with any sponsor LIR. And I'm not sure it helps RIPE itself to have hundreds and hundreds of members who don't participate in RIPE's processes. So I don't think it's something that, personally, I don't think it should be encouraged.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm interested in RIPE because while we're not an ISP, our business depends entirely on the internet, and the health of the UK internet helps my life. You'd be surprised how many people ask their customers to join RIPE every time they take a customer on and reuse the space somewhere else. Rightly or wrongly, that's what people are doing. It's cheaper if you need a small amount. To me, it was cheaper to join RIPE than it was to do the other stuff. And yes, I will be going to a RIPE meeting, and it will become part of our business. And also, I expect in the future, if you think about where I am, the address space in a RIPE membership is probably a bit useful now, but would be even more useful in the future. So you can think a longer term whether you want to do it or not.
I think there's one last question here. Yep.
Hi. I guess I'm just worried about the implication of getting small organisations to get their own AS numbers and their own PI space. I mean, the address table implications are going to be immense. I mean, it doesn't seem. I mean, it's a great idea for you, but if we get 10,000 new ASs just out of the UK.
Yeah, you're right. It's not sustainable, which is one of the reasons for doing the talk and saying that. And one of the slides says it's not for everyone, and I don't think it's. I don't think it's sustainable. But if you take the fact that when I talk to my friends and other people I talk to who go and install, say, small Windows networks, that they always put in dual ones. They put in lease lines with an ADSL backup, and it relies on that to work. So those, if those people are going to use V6, they either have to NAT the V6, or they need to get some PI space, or they need some other answer, or perhaps the providers they are using need to provide, make it easier to buy 2 routers to one provider, so they're just using PA space that's maybe using BGP just internally to the other thing about this is you realise that BGP is really the only way to work out whether you're talking to router at the other end or not. PPP is kind of okay, but BGP is kind of the gold standard, and you think about every possible way of doing it, and it comes back to using BGP even if you're only using it internally. So it could be that one of the answers for ISPs to sell more products which are dual kind of dual pop, and
but you don't. These users don't need address space of their own. I mean, what they need is for what you described in the beginning.
They need Facebook to work. Yeah.
So they need the router advertisements when there are 2 of them. They need the clients to just pick one and use it, just like would happen with DHCP. I mean, what I'm not clear about is whether that's non-compliant or whether someone needs to go into the ITF and say endpoints that do IP6 ought to be able to pick up whichever one it is and then just work. And if that was the case, then it would have worked out of the box, right?
We've got 30 seconds for IETF to actually respond to this.
I like the question.
No pressure. So yeah, I think this is a really good talk. I think since PI isn't sustainable, then essentially what's going to happen is either the conditional RA type of approach, if you read that draft, I think that's a really good way to do it. But you've hit the nail on the head. The people that go around and configure these things and help these organisations don't know about that and don't understand it. So I think the only inevitable conclusion is we'll just end up with MPTv6 deployed in these networks to make that. It's very similar to v4, which is sad, but I think that's where we'll end up.
So I know that Enter have a dual pop product where they do alternative backhaul and 2 routers. I know that Virgin do. If you talk to Virgin Business, I don't see many of the smaller guys actually actively selling a product. AA have a product which gives you effectively two things into one router. I think those products need to become a bit more mainstream, and maybe there's a thing in the sales model to mean the IT guys who are out installing these sell a service rather than selling a box. The box is indeed a single point of failure, but it seems to, if the perceived problem is the quality of the connection, then a box is seen as unfailable. I mean, Neil said it. You're not necessarily selling the right thing, but it's a perceived that you're doing something about it. Whether it works or not is not. But there's certainly more scope for better services in the UK for people to sell stuff that just does this as a managed service. It just works. It's fine. Good questions. I like the questions.
Thank you, Tim, for the talk. It's spawned an awful lot of very interesting debate, and I can imagine this is going to go on.
You realise it's not a simple problem. It's not just something that you just fix.
Thank you very much.